The jacket was the first thing she laughed at, and it would be the last thing she ever underestimated. Camille Ashford had not meant for the laugh to come out. It escaped her the way a small cruelty escapes a busy person, automatically, on its way to somewhere more important. She had walked into her own boardroom on the 41st floor of the Laurent Tower, and there, standing near the long window with the city spread out behind him like a held breath, was a man in a jacket the color of old slate. The cuffs were soft with age. There was a patch at the left elbow, mended so neatly it almost disappeared, and a faint shine along the lapel where 1,000 mornings had pressed against it. To Camille, in that half-second of looking, it was a thrift store coat that had wandered into a room where every other garment cost more than a car. So she laughed, one short syllable, and said to no one and everyone, "Did we start letting people in off the street? Or is this part of the heritage exhibit?" 2 of the executives at the table smiled, because that was their job. The man by the window did not. He simply turned his head, the way a clock turns, unhurried, and looked at her with an expression that held no insult and no apology, which unsettled her far more than anger would have. What Camille Ashford did not know, what no one at that long table knew, was that the jacket she had just mocked had been cut and sewn entirely by hand by the most important couturier the House of Laurent had ever produced. That every stitch in it had been placed by a man whose name was carved into the marble of the lobby 39 floors below them, and that the quiet figure wearing it was the only living person on earth who could save the company she had been hired to rescue. 1 hour later, that same boardroom would go completely silent. Not because of anything Camille said, because of a label, because someone turned back a worn collar, read 3 words stitched in faded silk, and said a name out loud. And the question that followed was not about the jacket or the joke or the way she had made a stranger small in front of her staff. The question was far more dangerous than any of that. It was, what does he know about the coat we are about to put on display? The morning had started the way most of Elias Ward's mornings started, with a 7-year-old conducting an investigation into the universe at maximum volume. Dad, where's the wren? Wren Ward had a name and a stuffed bird that shared it. A small gray thing with one button eye loose on its thread, and the bird went everywhere she went, which meant the bird also got lost everywhere she went. She announced its disappearance from her bedroom, then from the hallway, then from directly beside Elias's elbow while he stood at the counter of their small apartment, turning 2 eggs into something that resembled breakfast. He found the bird where it always was, wedged in the cushions of the reading chair, and held it out without a word. Wren took it with the grave relief of a person reunited with a lost passport, hugged his arm in payment, and then immediately asked whether he had remembered to sew the button back onto her school cardigan, because Maddie Okafor had said a cardigan with a missing button was basically rags, and Wren had a great deal to say about Maddie Okafor. He had remembered. He always remembered. He had done it the night before, after she was asleep, by the lamp at the kitchen table, 3 small stitches and a knot tucked under so it would never show. He had also, while he was at it, reinforced the shoulder seam that had started to pull, because a thing worth keeping was worth keeping properly. They walked to her school, because the shop was only a few blocks past it, and the morning was bright and cool, the kind of October light that makes a city look like it has decided to be kind for a day. Wren held his hand and narrated. He listened the way he listened to everything, completely. At the gate, she made him promise to be home before 6, because it was pasta night, the one with the butter and the black pepper, and he promised, and she vanished into the bright current of small people with her bird under her arm and her ponytail already coming undone. He stood at the gate a moment after she was gone. He allowed himself this, 1 minute, sometimes 2, just stillness and the residue of having been a father. Then he walked the last 3 blocks to the shop and unlocked the door and turned on the light. The shop was called Ward Alterations, hand-painted on the glass by a signed man who had since retired, and it smelled of pressed wool and beeswax thread and the particular warm dust of a place where fabric lives. There was a sewing machine he rarely used and a long cutting table he used every day, and on the wall, where a customer might see it without quite registering it, hung a pair of tailor's shears so old the steel had gone the color of river stone. They had belonged to someone else once. Elias kept them oiled. He kept everything that mattered oiled and sharp and ready, the way you keep a relationship, which is what these things were to him, not tools. He hung his slate-gray jacket on the hook by the door, the way he did every morning, and he did not think about it, because you do not think about your own skin. He had worn it for 19 years. He knew the weight of it the way he knew the weight of his own arms. He had repaired it 4 times, each repair invisible, each one a small conversation with the man who had made it. His phone buzzed on the cutting table. The screen read Maison Laurent. Oh, Mercier. He looked at it for a long moment. Odette. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in a long time, and seeing it written felt like opening a door into a room he had decided years ago to keep closed. He let it ring. The voicemail icon appeared. He did not tap it. He picked up a man's overcoat that needed a new lining and a hem brought up, and he set to work. And for 2 hours the only sound in the shop was the soft pull of thread through cloth and the occasional creak of the radiator deciding whether to bother. The phone rang again at 11. The same name. This time, after it stopped, a text arrived. It was short. Elias. I would not ask if it were not the coat. The Nightingale. Please. He set the needle down. He sat for a while in the chair by the window with his hands very still in his lap, which for Elias Ward was the equivalent of another man pacing a hole into the floor. The Nightingale. He had not let himself think the word in years, and now it was in the room with him, and the room had gotten smaller. He picked the phone back up, and instead of calling, he reread the message twice, and then he stood and took the slate-gray jacket off the hook and put it on, the way you put on armor, or memory, or both. 40 blocks north and 41 floors up, the house of Laurent was quietly coming apart, and the people in charge of it were doing the thing that frightened people do best, which is to keep talking. Maison Laurent had been founded 61 years earlier by a man named Émile Laurent, who had arrived in the city with a single battered suitcase, a roll of canvas, and a way of building a coat that no one had ever quite been able to imitate. He did not advertise. He did not chase trends. He made garments by hand, slowly, the way other men build cathedrals, and within 15 years the most powerful shoulders in the country wore his work without ever saying his name out loud, because saying it out loud was for people who needed to be impressed. By the time Émile died, the house was a legend wrapped in a business, and the legend was worth far more than the business, which is exactly the kind of imbalance that attracts the wrong sort of attention. The wrong sort of attention, in this case, had a name, and the name was Royce Lambert. Royce was the chairman of the board, 58 years old, smooth as a river stone and twice as cold. A man who had learned long ago that the most effective way to take something is to convince everyone that you are saving it. For 3 years he had been arranging, with great patience and great care, for the House of Laurent to be sold to a conglomerate called the Calder Group, a company that owned 11 brands and the soul of none of them. Calder did not want to make coats by hand. Calder wanted to stamp the word Laurent in gold foil onto things made by machines in enormous quantities, and sell the name of a dead genius to people who would never know the difference. The deal would make the shareholders comfortable and make Royce Lambert rich, and it was scheduled to be signed in 9 days. There was only one inconvenient obstacle standing between Royce and his comfortable future, and her name was Camille Ashford. Camille was 35 years old, and she had been brought in 18 months earlier with a mandate to modernize. She was good at it. She was good at almost everything, which was its own kind of problem, because being good at almost everything teaches a person that the answer is always speed and the answer is always certainty. And it had never once occurred to Camille Ashford that there might be a category of thing that could only be reached slowly. She had grown up with nothing, clawed her way up through 3 companies and 4 reorganizations, and she had a particular allergy to anyone who looked like they had been handed an easy life. She read worn clothing as failure. She read soft-spokenness as weakness. She had built an armor of crispness around herself, and the armor had worked so well for so long that she had forgotten it was armor at all. What Camille did not yet understand was that the modernization she had been hired to lead and the sellout that Royce Lambert was quietly engineering were not the same thing, and that Royce had been counting on her not understanding that for exactly as long as it took him to win. The crisis that had pulled everyone into the boardroom that Tuesday had a specific shape, and the shape was a coat. In 9 days, the city's largest museum was opening a retrospective of Émile Laurent's life and work. It was called The Hand of Laurent, and the centerpiece, the single object the entire exhibit was built around, was the coat Émile had been making in the last year of his life, the one he had never finished, the one the house had always referred to in hushed tones as the Nightingale. It was supposed to be his masterwork. It had hung, half-completed, in a climate-controlled case in the Loron archive for years, a relic, a promise, the thing the brand pointed to when it wanted to remind the world what it had once been capable of. The museum had asked the house to finish it, to complete the Nightingale, using Emil's own methods, so that it could stand in the center of the exhibit as living proof that the hand of Loron still beat somewhere inside the company that bore his name. And the house could not do it. They had tried. The current head of the atelier, a woman named Odette Mercier, who had sewn beside Emile for 30 years and was now nearly 70 herself, had assembled the best people the company still employed, and they had stood around the unfinished coat for 3 weeks, and they had failed. Because Emile had built the Nightingale using a construction that he had never written down, a way of floating the canvas and rolling the lapel and finishing the buttonholes that lived only in his hands, and the only person he had ever fully taught it to had left the company years ago and never come back. "We are out of time," said Royce Lambert, in the boardroom, in the smooth and sorrowful voice he used when he was about to suggest the exact thing he had wanted all along. "The museum opens in 9 days. We cannot complete the centerpiece. I think we all understand what that means. It means the heritage line is finished, in practice if not in name, and the most responsible thing this board can do is finalize the Calder arrangement and protect what value remains." He let the sentence settle. I take no pleasure in saying it, but sentiment is not a strategy. It was a good speech. Royce gave good speeches, and it would have worked, because everyone at the table was tired and frightened, and nobody wanted to be the one to argue for hope, except that down at the far end of the table a young conservator named Nadia Halford, on loan from the museum and far too junior to be speaking, cleared her throat. "There might be someone," Nadia said. Every head turned. Royce's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "There's a name in the archive records," Nadia went on, her voice steadying as she committed to the cliff she had just walked off. "When Emile Loron was alive, there was one apprentice he kept longest. The notes call him the boy who could match the master's hand. He's listed on the construction documents for some of the late pieces. When I cross-referenced him against current personnel, he doesn't come up because he left the company. But Madame Mercier would know him." Nadia looked down the table, suddenly aware of how far she had traveled from her clearance. "His name is Elias Ward." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a true thing has been said in front of people who would have preferred it stay buried. Odette Mercier, who had been sitting with her hands folded and her old eyes closed as if she were somewhere else, opened them. "I know exactly who he is," Odette said. "I have already called him." And at the head of the table, Camille Ashford said, "Then where is he?" He was, at that moment, stepping out of an elevator he had sworn he would never set foot in again. Odette had told him to come straight up. She had met him in a quiet corridor off the main floor, and for a moment the two of them had simply looked at each other, the old woman and the man who had once been the boy, and neither of them had said the thing that was in the air, which was the name Emile, which was "I have missed you," which was "I am sorry it had to be like this." Then Odette had taken his hand in both of hers, the way she used to when he was 19 and his stitches were not yet perfect, and she had said, "They are about to sell him for parts, Elias. The whole of him. The Nightingale, the name, all of it. Come and see what they have done." So he came. He walked into the boardroom on the 41st floor in his slate-gray jacket with the mended elbow, and he went and stood by the window because he did not want to sit at that table. And that was when Camille Ashford walked in late, glanced at him, and laughed. "Did we start letting people in off the street?" she said. "Or is this part of the heritage exhibit?" Elias turned his head and looked at her, and said nothing, and the saying nothing was so complete that the smiles around the table faltered. Odette stood up so fast her chair scraped. "Camille." "It's all right," Elias said. His voice was quiet and even. It did not rise to defend itself, because it had nothing to prove. "She's not wrong about the jacket being old." Camille set her folio down on the table with a small precise sound. She had recovered her balance, and she did not like being thrown off it, and the man's calm was a kind of throwing off. "I'm sorry," she said, in a tone that contained no apology whatsoever. "Who exactly are you?" "My name is Elias Ward. And you're here because—" "Because Madame Mercier asked me to come and look at a coat," he said. "Though now that I'm here, I think I may have been asked to come and look at a funeral." For a moment no one breathed. Royce Lambert's eyes had narrowed by a degree. The name Elias Ward had landed in his memory like a stone into a pond he had thought long since drained, and the ripples were not pleasant ones. Camille folded her arms. She was looking at the jacket again, and her mouth had the shape it took when she had decided to win a small thing in front of an audience. "Mr. Ward," she said, "I run a luxury fashion house. We are 9 days from a museum opening, and a great deal of money is in this room. I don't have time for riddles from a man in a coat he's clearly had since college. So let me be direct. What could you possibly do that the best people we employ have not already failed to do?" Elias's phone buzzed in his pocket. He knew the ringtone before he looked, the one he had assigned to Ren's school. He held up one finger, one single unhurried finger, to the most powerful person in the room, and he answered the phone. "Dad." Ren's voice was small and careful, which meant she was calling from the front office where the secretary could hear. "I'm just checking you're still coming." "For pasta." "I'm coming," he said. His eyes did not leave Camille's face. "Before 6. The one with the butter. And the pepper. And the pepper. Go back to class, little bird." He hung up. He put the phone away. And then he did the thing that ended the meeting, though no one in the room understood yet that it was over. He took off the jacket. He did it slowly, the way you handle something you respect, and he turned it inside out, and he laid it open on the long boardroom table among the legal folders and the coffee cups and the future that Royce Lambert had so carefully arranged. And then he turned back the worn collar, and underneath, in the soft hidden place where only the maker and the wearer would ever look, there was a small square of pale silk, and on it, stitched by hand in thread gone the gold of old wedding rings, was a tiny bird with its wings half open, and beneath the bird, 3 words. Nadia Halford was the one who stood up. She had spent 2 years of her young life cataloging the work of Émile Laurent, and she crossed the boardroom before she had decided to, and she leaned over the open jacket, and the blood went out of her face. "That's the Ren," she whispered. "That's his mark. He only ever put it on." She stopped. She looked up, and her hand had risen to her mouth. "He only ever put the Ren on the pieces he made for people he loved. There are 9 of them in the world. The museum has been trying to locate the missing ones for the catalog for a year." 8, Elias said quietly. "There are 8 in collections. This is the 9th. He made it for me the day I finished my apprenticeship. He cut it himself. He would not let me touch a stitch of it. He said a man should own one thing in his life he did not have to make for himself." He turned the collar back down, gently, the way you would tuck a blanket over a sleeping child. "And under the bird it says, Amon Myler Alvrich. To my finest work." He did not mean the coat. The room had gone completely silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses on the ears. Odette Mercier was crying without any sound at all, the dignified weeping of the very old, and she said, into the quiet, the name that Royce Lambert had spent 3 years and a great deal of money trying to keep from ever being said in that room with any power behind it. Émile Laurent taught 2 people to build a coat with their hands in his entire life, Odette said. "One of them was me, and I was never as good as I pretended. The other one is standing by your window in the jacket you laughed at, and he is the only living soul who can finish the Nightingale. And you, Camille, you nearly sent him back out the door." Camille Ashford did not move. Her arms were still folded, but they had stopped meaning anything. She was looking at the open jacket on the table, at the 8,000 invisible hand stitches she had read as poverty, and something in her chest was reorganizing itself in a way she did not have a word for and did not enjoy. And Royce Lambert, very smoothly, said, "Well, this is all very moving. But it doesn't change the timeline, and it doesn't change the fact that a sentimental object and a finished commission are 2 very different things." He smiled at Elias. "Welcome back, Mr. Ward. It's been a long time. I hope you've kept your skills up, repairing trousers." Elias looked at him for the first time. And for the first time, something flickered in the calm. "Hello, Royce," he said. "You still talk like a man reading the eulogy before the patients died. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the shape of the man. And the shape of the man had been carved by a single year that broke his life cleanly into a before and an after." Elias Ward had not come to tailoring the expected way. He had no famous family and no design school behind him. He had been 19 and going nowhere, sweeping the floor of a fabric warehouse for an hourly wage, when Émile Laurent came in one afternoon to argue with a supplier about a bolt of wool, and noticed the way the boy with the broom had folded a stray length of cloth on the counter. Just folded it. but he had folded it along the grain, instinctively, the way you fold something you respect, and Emile, who was 70 by then and had stopped expecting to be surprised by anyone, stood very still and watched the boy for a while, and then said, "Come here. Show me your hands." He took Elias on as an apprentice that week, over the objections of everyone, and for the next several years he taught him the way the old masters taught, which is to say slowly, and without praise, and entirely by hand. He taught him to read a body the way a doctor reads a chart, the sloping shoulder, the dropped hip, the way a man carries his grief in the set of his neck. He taught him to draw a pattern from nothing. He taught him to pad stitch a lapel, hundreds of tiny diagonal stitches by hand through canvas and cloth, so that the lapel would roll, would have life in it, would breathe and move with the wearer the way a fused, glued, machine-pressed lapel never could. He taught him to build a coat around a floating canvas of horsehair and wool so that the garment was not a shell strapped to a body, but a structure that learned the body over time, softened to it, became loyal to it. And he taught him the buttonhole. Emile Laurent's buttonholes were famous among the few people who knew what to look for. He cut them by hand and bound them with silk, dense and raised and faintly domed, and on every personal piece he made, he left one buttonhole on the lapel deliberately, perfectly open, finished, immaculate, but cut all the way through, a working hole on a lapel that had no button to meet it. People assumed it was a flaw. It was not. Emile called it the breathing hole. He said a coat with no breathing hole was a coat that had decided it was finished learning, and a coat that had decided it was finished learning was already dead. It was his signature, the thing no rival could copy without understanding why, and the why had never been written down anywhere. Elias could do all of it. By the time he was 25, the older tailors were quietly bringing their hardest problems to the young man with the careful hands, and Emile, who never praised anyone, was overheard once telling a client that the boy's hands were better than his own had been at that age. Then Emile died, in his sleep, with a half-built coat on the form beside his bed, and the house passed into the control of investors, and the investors brought in a man named Royce Lambert to extract value, and Royce Lambert looked at the atelier, at all those skilled hands building 4 coats a month when a factory could build 4,000, and saw only waste. Elias had fought him. He had stood in a meeting much like the one he was standing in now, a younger man with less calm, and argued that the hand was the entire point, that you could not factory the soul of the place and keep the place, and Royce had smiled and agreed and waited. And then, slowly, with documents that appeared at convenient times and rumors that started in convenient places, Royce had arranged for Elias Ward to be made to look like the problem rather than the solution. There had been a botched commission Elias had not touched, made to look like his. There had been a whisper that the master's last apprentice had grown arrogant, difficult, impossible. And in the same terrible season that the house pushed him out, his wife, a gentlewoman named Lena who had been sick for a long time and hidden house sick, finally let go, and Elias found himself standing in a hospital corridor, holding a 4-year-old daughter and a box of his own tailor's tools, with no job and no master and no map. He had not gone back. Not because the house had defeated him, but because the arithmetic had changed. Wren needed a father who was present, not a man chasing his old name through rooms full of people like Royce Lambert. So he had built a smaller life. He had hung a sign in a window. He had spent his days bringing other people's clothes back to life, taking in a seam here and lengthening a sleeve there. And at night, after Wren was asleep, he would sometimes sit at the table and build a single buttonhole by hand, 15 stitches to the inch, just to feel his hands remember, the way a retired pianist will sometimes play one bar in an empty room and then close the lid. He had told Wren, once, that he used to make beautiful coats for important people. She had asked why he stopped. He had thought about it and said, "Because the most important person got small enough to carry, and I wanted to be where she was." Wren had considered this and decided it was acceptable. All of this lived behind the calm face of the man standing by the window, and almost no one in that boardroom knew any of it. But Odette knew, and Royce knew, and now Camille Ashford was beginning, slowly and unwillingly, to suspect that she had walked into a story that had started long before she arrived and was about to turn in a direction she could not control. "I'll look at the coat," Elias said. "That's all I came for. I'm not here to consult, and I'm not here to be welcomed back, and I'm not here to be in a meeting." He picked his jacket up off the table and put it back on, and the room watched him do it as if he were resheathing a sword. "Madame Mercier, will you take me down to the archive?" "You don't take instructions from the staff," Royce began. "There are protocols." "Royce," Camille said. It was one word, and it stopped him, and the fact that it stopped him told Elias something useful about who actually held the rope in this building and who only thought he did. Camille was looking at Elias with an expression that had shed its contempt somewhere in the last 10 minutes and had not yet found anything to replace it with, which left her unguarded for the first time since she had entered the room. "I'll take you down myself," she said. "If that's all right." "It's your building," Elias said. "You can go wherever you like." It was not quite forgiveness, but it was not a door closing either, and Camille, who was very good at reading the difference between a no and a not yet, followed him to the elevator. The archive was on the 3rd floor, behind 2 sets of doors and a keypad, and a wall of climate control that kept the air at the temperature of a cool spring morning. The Nightingale stood in the center of the room on a padded form, under a soft museum light, behind glass. It was, even unfinished, a remarkable object. A long evening coat in midnight wool so dark it drank the light, with a structure to the shoulders that seemed to defy the softness of the cloth, and a sweep to the skirt that suggested motion even standing still. Camille had seen it a dozen times. She had used a photograph of it in 3 different pitch decks. She thought of it the way she thought of the building itself, as an asset with a number attached. Elias asked Odette to open the case. Odette looked at Camille, and Camille nodded, and the glass came away, and Elias stepped close to the coat and did not touch it for a long moment. He simply looked. His eyes moved over it the way a reader's eyes move over a page, the lapel, the shoulder seam, the way the canvas sat under the cloth, the buttonholes. The room watched him the way the boardroom had watched him, because there was something in the quality of his attention that made you understand you were in the presence of a different kind of seeing. Then he reached out and turned back the front of the coat and put 2 fingers against the inside of the chest, lightly, the way a doctor lays fingers against a wrist, and he went very still. "When was this taken out of the archive last?" he said. "It hasn't been," Odette said. "Not in years. It's been right here." "That's not true," Elias said. He said it without drama, the way he said everything, which made it worse. "This coat has been out of this case, and it has been out recently, and it has been somewhere with the wrong humidity, and somebody who is not a fool but is also not Émile Laurent has been inside it with a needle." He turned to Odette. "Feel the chest. Through the cloth. Tell me what you feel." Odette's old hands, hands that had sewn beside Émile for 30 years, went to the coat and pressed gently, and her face changed. "The canvas," she said slowly. It doesn't float. It's fused. It's been glued." "It's been glued," Elias agreed. "Under the front, where you can't see it, where it would never show in a photograph and never show behind glass. The chest of the Nightingale has fusible interlining in it." He let that sit. Émile Laurent would have burned the building down before he glued a canvas into a coat. He used to say a fused chest was a lie you wear on the outside of your heart. He turned the lapel over. "And look at this." He showed them the buttonhole on the lapel. It was beautiful. It was dense and raised and bound in dark silk, 15 stitches to the inch, the work of a genuinely skilled hand. It was closed. "There's no breathing hole," Elias said. Whoever finished the front of this coat did not know about the breathing hole. They knew everything you could learn by looking at Émile's work. They did not know the one thing you could only learn by being taught by him. He stepped back from the coat. The cool spring air of the archive hummed around them. "This is not the Nightingale. This is a very, very good copy of the Nightingale. Most of it, the back, the skirt, the sleeves, is Émile's true work, unfinished, exactly as he left it. But the front, the chest, the lapels, the part everyone photographs, has been remade by someone else and put back. Someone took the original front panels out of this coat and replaced them with forgeries and returned the coat to its case so that nobody would ever know the real heart of it was gone." Camille had gone pale. "Why?" she said. "Why would anyone?" "Because the front panels of an Émile Laurent masterwork, signed, from the last year of his life, with the original breathing hole intact, would sell privately to the right collector for more than this entire company's quarterly profit," Elias said. "And because the only way the theft is ever discovered is if someone who actually knew the master's hand puts 2 fingers inside this coat, which has not happened in years. Until today, he looked at her steadily. Whoever did this was betting that nobody left in this building could tell the difference. And until about 10 minutes ago, they were right. The archive was very quiet. And into the quiet, from the doorway, came the smooth voice of Royce Lambert, who had followed them down. "This is an extraordinary accusation," Royce said, "from a man who repairs trousers." Elias did not turn around right away. He finished settling the lapel of the false coat back into place, gently, before he faced the chairman. "It isn't an accusation," Elias said. "It's a diagnosis. The accusation is a different thing, and I haven't made it yet." "You're suggesting," Royce said, stepping into the room with his hands clasped in front of him, the picture of wounded reason, "that someone in this organization stole and sold the most valuable piece in our heritage, replaced it with a fraud, and that this fraud has sat in our own archive for years without anyone noticing. Do you understand how that sounds? It sounds like the fantasy of a man who used to work here, who was let go under unhappy circumstances, and who has nursed a grievance ever since." He smiled at Camille, the smile of an adult appealing to another adult over the head of a child. "Camille, we are 9 days from a museum opening. We are 9 days from a deal that protects this company. And a man in a thrift store coat walks in and tells us our crown jewel is fake. Ask yourself who benefits from that story. It was, Camille would think later, a very good performance. It was exactly the performance she herself would have given, in his position, 18 months ago. The appeal to time. The appeal to fear. The quiet character assassination dressed as concern. She knew the moves because she had made them. And that, in the end, was why it did not work. "Royce," she said slowly, "how would you know the deal protects this company?" The smile did not move, but something behind it did. "I mean," Camille went on, and she could feel her own mind moving now, faster than she wanted it to, toward a conclusion she did not want to reach. "The Calder valuation is built on the heritage assets. The archive. The Nightingale is the single most valuable item in that archive. The whole deal is priced around it. So either you don't know it's been gutted, in which case you've been steering this board toward a sale based on an asset that doesn't exist." She paused. "Or you do know, in which case you've known for a long time, and you've been pushing us to sell fast, before anyone could finish the coat and look inside it." The archive had become the kind of silent that has a pulse in it. "I think," Royce said, and his voice had lost a little of its silk, "that you are letting a sentimental moment cloud your judgment. And I think when you have had time to consider the legal exposure of repeating any of this, you will be grateful that I—" "Nadia," Camille said, without taking her eyes off Royce. "You said the museum has been trying to locate the missing Laurent pieces for a year. The ones with the wren. For the catalog." "Yes," Nadia said from the doorway, where she had appeared, having followed everyone down because no junior conservator in history has ever stayed in a boardroom when the story walked out of it. "8 located. The 9th it's Mr. Ward's jacket. But there's more than 9 pieces missing from the records. There are a handful of late pieces, from Emil's last 2 years, that show up in his construction notebooks, and then just vanish. No sale records. No provenance. We assumed they were never finished. Or destroyed. Or sold quietly by someone with access to the archive," Elias said. "To collectors who would never ask too many questions about where a thing came from, as long as it was real." He looked at Royce. The front of the Nightingale didn't go missing by accident, and it didn't go missing alone. It went the same place the others went. And a man doesn't sell the heart of a dead master's last coat unless he's already decided the whole house is going to belong to someone else soon, and the bodies will be buried under the new owner's name. Royce Lambert looked, for one moment, like a man standing on ice he has just heard crack. Then the smoothness came back over his face like water closing over a stone, and he straightened his cuffs, and he said, "I'm going to call counsel." And he turned and walked out of the archive, and the click of his shoes down the corridor was the sound of a plan changing in real time. Camille watched him go. Then she turned to Elias, and for a long moment, she did not say anything at all. "You knew," she finally said, "when you walked in this morning. You knew something was wrong before you'd even seen the coat." "I knew the house couldn't finish the Nightingale, because Odette told me," Elias said. "And I knew that the only way a man like Royce gets to sell a company that still has its soul is to first make everyone believe the soul is already gone. The failed commission. The heritage line is finished. The rush to sign. He shrugged, one shoulder, the slate-gray jacket moving with him. He needed the coat to be unfinishable. That's not the same as it being unfinished. And the difference is the whole story. Camille Ashford had spent 18 months running this company and 3 weeks panicking about a coat. And in the space of a single morning, a man she had laughed at had walked into her building, read a garment like a book, and shown her that the ground she was standing on was not the ground she thought it was. She did not say any of that. She said the only thing that mattered. "Will you finish it?" "The real one," Elias said. "Not the forgery. I won't put my hands inside another man's lie and pretend it's Emil's." He looked at the coat on its form, the true back and the false front, the masterwork and the theft sewn together into one object. "Find me the missing panels. The real ones. Then I'll finish the Nightingale." "They could be anywhere," Camille said. "They could be in a vault on another continent. We have 9 days." Elias was quiet a moment. Then, almost to himself, he said, "Emile signed everything he loved with the Wren. And he never sold a personal piece without telling the buyer the same thing he told me. He'd say, 'If you ever decide to part with this, the house will buy it back, and no questions asked.' It was his way of keeping his work from disappearing." He looked up. "There's a private ledger." He kept it himself, separate from the company books. Every personal commission, every buyer, every Wren. If Royce sold the panels to a collector, he sold to someone who already owned Laurent, because those are the only people who'd know what they were buying and keep quiet. And every one of those people is in Emile's ledger. "Where is the ledger?" Camille asked. Odette Mercier, who had been silent for a long time, made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "It was buried with him," she said. "In the company. When the investors took over, Royce ordered the personal effects archived and sealed. I packed them myself. The ledger is in a box on the 4th floor, in storage, under a man's name nobody has looked for in years, because nobody knew to look." She wiped her eyes, finally, with the back of one old hand. "It's under Émile Laurent. They sealed the soul of the place in a cardboard box and forgot the box was there." The next 9 days happened very fast and very slowly at the same time, the way the most important stretches of a life tend to. They found the ledger that same afternoon, in a sealed box on the 4th floor, exactly where Odette said it would be, in Emile's own slanting hand. And in the ledger, in the entries from the last 2 years, were the buyers, and cross-referenced against Nadia's list of vanished pieces. 3 names stood out. 3 private collectors who had each, in the 18 months after the company changed hands, quietly acquired a study, or a fragment, or an incomplete panel set from a discreet seller who asked for cash and no paperwork. Camille handled it the way she handled everything once she had decided to handle it, which was with terrifying competence pointed at last in the right direction. She did not call the police first. She called the 3 collectors herself, one by one, and she told each of them the truth, that they were in possession of stolen heritage panels from the Nightingale, that the company had no interest in scandal and every interest in recovery, and that Émile Laurent himself had written, in his own ledger, that the house would always buy his work back, no questions asked. 2 of the 3 had no idea what they had bought. The 3rd had suspected and bought anyway, and that one took lawyers in a week and a number Camille did not enjoy paying. But on the 8th day, with 1 day to spare, the original front panels of the Nightingale came back to the 3rd floor of the Laurent Tower in a flat archival case, and Elias Ward laid them out on the cutting table and put his 2 fingers against the chest of the real coat, and he closed his eyes, and he smiled, and it was the first time anyone in that building had seen him smile. "There it is," he said softly. "Hello, old man." He worked for 30 straight hours. He sent Camille home twice, and she came back both times, and the second time she did not pretend it was about the company. She brought coffee and a folding chair, and she sat in the cool archive air, and she watched a man rebuild a dead genius's masterwork with his bare hands. And somewhere in those 30 hours the last of her armor quietly came off, and she did not even notice it go. She watched him remove the forged front panels with a seam ripper, stitch by stitch, with a tenderness that bordered on apology, as if he were sorry for the false thing even as he ended it. She watched him set the true panels into place. She watched him pad-stitch the lapel by hand, hundreds of tiny diagonal stitches through canvas and cloth, his needle moving in a rhythm so steady it was almost a heartbeat, building the roll back into a lapel that had been waiting 20 years to roll. And at the very end, On the morning of the 9th day, she watched him take a tiny pair of scissors and a length of dark silk and cut, by hand, into the finished lapel, one perfect working buttonhole that no button would ever meet. The breathing hole, she said. It was not a question. The breathing hole, he agreed. He never finished it before he died. So technically, Elias tied off the last stitch and bit the thread and looked at the coat, complete, whole, true, 61 years of a house standing in a single garment. Technically, I just finished the last thing Emile Laurent ever made, with his hands in mine. Camille Ashford, who had not cried in front of another person since she was a child and had built an entire career on the strength of that fact, had to turn and look out the window for a while. Royce Lambert never made it to the opening. The morning the ledger surfaced, he had tried, smoothly, to get ahead of it, calling an emergency session, citing the need to protect the company from a disgruntled former employee and an impulsive chief executive making accusations under emotional duress. He had timed it well. He had always timed things well. But Camille had spent the missing days doing something other than recovering panels. She had spent them building a file, the way the best operators do, quietly, completely, with the patience she usually reserved for offense and had finally learned to use for defense. She walked into the board session with Nadia's catalog cross-references, with Emile's ledger, with the recovered panels and their cash-only provenance, with the records of who had sealed the personal effects and who had steered the company toward a fire sale priced on an asset he had personally hollowed out. She laid it on the table the way Elias had laid his jacket down 9 days before. Open, undeniable, the truth stitched into the seams of it. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, somewhere in the last 9 days, from a man who never raised his, that the quietest voice in the room is often the one that ends the argument. Section by section, she said to the board, the deal Royce Lambert has been steering us toward is priced on heritage assets he knew were compromised, because he is the one who compromised them. The Calder valuation is fraudulent because the collateral is fraudulent because he made it so. I am not asking this board to mourn. I am asking it to do arithmetic. She let one beat pass. And then I am asking it to do the right thing, which I am aware is not always the same arithmetic. By the time the lawyers had finished, the Calder Group had withdrawn, unwilling to be within 100 miles of a heritage fraud investigation. Royce Lambert was removed from the board, his conduct referred to prosecutors, the years of quiet sales unspooling behind him like a thread pulled from a cheap hem. And the museum opening went ahead. 9 days from the morning a man in a worn jacket had walked into a boardroom and been laughed at, with the true nightingale at its center, finished at last, breathing hole and all. The placard beside the case named Emile Laurent as the maker, which was correct. It did not name the man who had completed it, which was also correct, because that man had asked, quietly and without negotiation, that his name appear nowhere. No credit, no fee, no standing arrangement. He had read the code. He had told the truth. He had finished the master's last work, and he wanted nothing attached to it but the master's own name. I don't understand you, Camille had said, on the night they recovered the last panel, standing in the cool archive air. You could have anything from this company you wanted. A title, a studio, a number with a lot of zeros. You walked away from it once, and you're walking away from it again. What? Elias had thought about it honestly, because she had asked it honestly. Because I don't do this for companies, he said. I never did. I do it because the work is true, and someone was about to get hurt by something they didn't understand, and because a man I loved put a bird in the back of a coat and called me his finest work, and I'm not going to let a man like Royce Lambert turn that into a price. He looked at her, and there was no edge in it, no lesson. And because I have a daughter who's expecting pasta, with butter and pepper, and the most important thing I make these days isn't coats. Camille had been quiet for a moment. You knew I'd be sorry, she said. About the jacket. About the way you knew before you even turned around. Didn't you? I knew you'd be the kind of person who'd be sorry, he said. There's a difference. Most people who are cruel by reflex never become sorry, because being sorry means admitting the reflex was real. You walked it back inside of an hour. That told me more about you than the laugh did. It was not absolution, but it was a hand held out, and Camille Ashford, who had spent her whole life learning that you take what's offered before it's withdrawn, did not take it. Instead, for the first time and longer than she could remember, she simply stood next to it, and let it be there, and did not try to win anything from the moment at all. The weeks that followed were quieter than the ones before them, and quiet in a different way, the quiet of something having settled rather than something being held down. Camille Ashford did not announce a transformation. She did not send a company-wide email about values or commission a workshop. She simply began, in small ways, to behave like a different kind of leader. She started asking the atelier to walk her through how a thing was made before she asked how fast it could be made. She stopped reading worn clothing as failure. She kept Emil's ledger in the top drawer of her own desk, not as an asset, but as a reminder. The hand, she said, is the entire point. I had to be taught that. I'd rather not have to be taught it twice. Odette Mercier noticed first, the way the old and the watchful always do. She said nothing. She simply noted it, and went on running her atelier, and trained 2 young tailors in the pad stitch and the floating canvas, because a thing that lives only in one pair of hands is a thing one accident away from being lost forever, and she had decided, at nearly 70, that she was not going to let that happen again. Elias Ward went back to his shop. He had never really left it. He took in seams and let out hems and brought other people's clothes back to life, and at night, after Wren was asleep, he sometimes sat at the table and built a single buttonhole by hand, 15 stitches to the inch, just to feel his hands remember. He had agreed to one thing, and one thing only, from the House of Laurent, to come in 2 afternoons a month, quietly, with no title and no name on any door, and teach the 2 young tailors the things that had never been written down. The breathing hole, the way to read a body, the way to fold a length of cloth so that it knows you respect it. He did it for free. When Camille asked him why, he said, "Because Emile didn't charge me, and you don't get to keep a thing like that. You can only pass it on." And on a Wednesday afternoon in late autumn, the kind of afternoon that announces winter without apology, all low gold light, and the smell of leaves that had given up, he was sitting in his old pickup outside Wren's school, engine ticking as it cooled, when he saw a familiar figure on the sidewalk. Camille Ashford was walking on the school side of the street, coat unbuttoned, no folio, a paper cup of coffee in one hand, moving at a pace he had never seen from her, the pace of someone who had recently given herself permission to be somewhere without a purpose. She was not there for business. She did not have anything to win. She would have admitted if pressed, simply found herself in the neighborhood more often than the neighborhood strictly required, on afternoons that did not strictly need her, near a school that was not strictly on her way to anywhere. Then she saw the truck and the man in it, in the slate-gray jacket with the mended elbow, and she slowed, and she smiled before she had decided to. Wren came out of the school doors in her usual tornado of backpack and loose ponytail, the gray bird under one arm, and launched herself at the passenger door with the full confidence of a 7-year-old who knows exactly where her person is. And then she noticed the woman on the sidewalk, and she looked at her with the particular radar of children, which is less cynical than adults and far more precise. And her whole face opened into the uncomplicated delight of a child who is simply glad to see someone, with no further calculation required. "You're the lady from the tall building," Wren said. "Dad fixed your coat." "He fixed a lot of things," Camille said. Elias got out of the truck. He looked at Camille. She looked at him. There was the ordinary texture of the afternoon all around them, other parents, other children, the sound of a school day ending, and in the middle of it the strange and slightly improbable fact that they were standing on the same sidewalk by choice. "She informed me this morning," Elias said, nodding at his daughter, "that her teacher is unfair and that Maddie Okafor is, and I'm quoting, the actual worst. She sounds like someone I'd want on my board," Camille said. Wren, having absorbed this exchange with great interest, tugged her father's sleeve and stage whispered, "Dad, she has a really nice coat." Elias looked down at it. It was a good coat. It was, in fact, a very good coat, and he recognized the make of it at a glance, the floating canvas, the hand-rolled lapel, and he looked up at Camille with one eyebrow slightly raised, because he knew exactly which atelier had built it and exactly who must have quietly commissioned it. "It is a nice coat," he agreed. "Whoever made it knew what they were doing." "I'm told the man who taught them is very particular," Camille said. "Won't take credit. Won't take money. Comes in twice a month and corrects everyone's stitches and then disappears." "Sounds difficult," Elias said. "Impossible," Camille agreed. There was a pause then, the kind that has possibility in it rather than discomfort. I owe you dinner, Camille said carefully. Or, I'd like to buy you dinner. Both of you. If that's a reasonable thing to offer. Ren looked up at her father with the expression of a person who has already decided and is waiting for the slow adult to catch up. Elias looked at the truck. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Camille Ashford, who was holding her coffee cup in both hands now and had the appearance of someone who had asked a real question and was prepared for a real answer, the same way she had asked will you finish it in a cold archive 9 days into a story that had started long before either of them. We eat early, he said. 6 o'clock. It's pasta night. The one with the butter, Ren added, in case this was a deal breaker. And the pepper, Camille said gravely. I've heard. It was not quite a yes, but it was not a no, and in the long, careful arithmetic of two guarded people learning the distance between who they had been and who they might become, the difference between those two things was almost nothing at all. He held the truck door for his daughter. Camille stood on the sidewalk in the coat that the hand of Laurent had made, in the low gold light, and watched the man she had laughed at buckle a 7-year-old into an old pickup with the same care he gave to everything. And she understood, finally and completely, the thing he had tried to tell her in the boardroom on the very first morning, before any of them knew the shape of the story they were standing inside of. You never know what you're standing next to. You never know who made the thing you're laughing at. And the most valuable work in any room is almost never the work that announces itself. She had spent her whole life learning to read the price tags on things. She was only just beginning to learn how to read the seams. If you felt something in this one, if you've ever been the person underestimated for what you were wearing, or the person who learned, a little too late, that quiet is not the same as small. Do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. Every like tells us you want more, and every subscriber lets us keep making them. Stick around. We've got another one coming, and it's even better.